Okay, there's the signal, the recording in progress. So, um, thank you to everyone for taking the time. My name's Jarrett Myers. I'm a board member with IPAC Toronto Region, and wanted to send a very warm welcome to everyone who's been able to join us to talk about what's such an important topic, public sector leadership, and with a group of people who it would be hard to think of a better panel of speakers on such an important topic. So today we're joined by Her Honor, the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, the Honourable Elizabeth Dowdeswell. She will be providing some opening remarks. And Fiona Crean, who is the inaugural Ombudsman of the City of Toronto, Marian, Jacko, the Assistant Deputy Attorney General at the Ontario Ministry of the Attorney General, and Kimberly Murray, who's the Independent Special Interlocutor for Missing Children in Unmarked Burials. All of our speakers have had very distinguished careers and have been recipients of the Lieutenant Governor's Award for public administration, which is the highest honor for public service in the province. I'm just going to start with the land acknowledgement, and then we'll get into the discussion. So I did want to begin today's meeting with the land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that IPAC's headquarters in Toronto is on the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, the meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and IPAC is grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. We're pleased to have viewers joining us today from not only across the province, but also across the country. And we hope that you recognize and acknowledge the traditional people of the land you work and live on. In terms of our agenda, Her Honor will be providing some opening remarks, and that will be followed by opening comments from each of our speakers. And we'll also have an opportunity to engage in a bit of a discussion around some of the topics that are raised in the opening comments. And I'd invite all participants of the webinar to provide any questions or comments, and we'll pose as many as possible to our speakers. And so obviously, with a topic as broad and as important as public sector leadership, there's only so much we can achieve in the short time we have available. But we are looking to get perspectives on a range of ancillary issues, such as how leaders are contributing to advancing reconciliation, how initiatives are positively impacting various communities and advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion. Also, notions around how leaders fail forward and how leaders not only drive organizational change, but also engage in self-care and mindfulness. So quite a wide range of important topics with a very deeply experienced panel. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Her Honor, Elizabeth Dowdeswell, for some opening remarks.
Thanks so much, Jarrett, and thank you for the invitation to be a part of this amazing conversation this afternoon. I'm just delighted to be with you. I'm one who is so very grateful for those who make a daily contribution to public service. For me, it's so much more than gainful employment. It's really a calling, and one that has been entered into with generosity of spirit, particularly by these three. That's why of all the award ceremonies over which I'm privileged to preside, it's the Lieutenant Governor's Medal of Distinction in Public Administration that always gives me such a distinct pleasure. For there is no more noble calling than serving the public. Today, we're going to hear from three most impressive past recipients of the award. Each one of them has shown amazing leadership skills, and while each one may do it differently, you'll no doubt see their compassion, their courage, and their dedication coming through. It's been a privilege to get to know them briefly and most importantly, to actually see that their work continues beyond the time when they were recognized for it. The work of a public service is a public servant, pardon me, is of course very demanding. In the long run, you're trying to shape reality, but in the short term, you're having to confront reality. You're called upon to be open to change, and in so doing, you can actually be an active driver of positive transformation. Collectively, we all share the challenges of building an inclusive and prosperous economy, stewarding our environmental resources, and creating just, sustainable, and resilient communities. I think now, post the intense COVID period, is precisely the time to rethink, reset, renew the path forward, to think seriously and engage in dialogue about what kind of future we face. That's why the issue of leadership is so important. But never doubt that what you do just really matters. I have no doubt that these three women are going to inspire you today to pursue excellence and perhaps even to renew your dedication. And let me just conclude by saying we are so very grateful for them, but also for all of you who are with us on screen today. The dedication that you display it to humanity on a daily basis is most appreciated. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Your Honor, for those opening remarks. I'm now going to turn it over to Marian, Jacko for some initial comments on the topic of public sector leadership.
Good afternoon. Now it's afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Wasi abano kwendejnakas makwendodem wikpongpong donjaba nishnabek wendao. What I was speaking was my Anishinaabe language, and translated, I was introducing you to who I am. Wasi abano kwe translates to coming dawn woman, and I was also explaining that I belong to the Bear Clan, and I come from Wikumakong First Nation, and I identify as Anishinaabe. I want to draw your attention to the photo I have in the background here. It's a doll, Haudenosaunee doll that was presented to me as an award about a week and a half ago. And it's the Vera Stiers Award in Community Service. And the reason why I'm sharing this photo with you is they had a number of recipients, and each of the recipients received a doll that was tailored to them. And for me, it was really significant that there was a lantern on the award, the doll that I was being presented with. When I first saw it, I was really kind of struck. And the reason for that is there would have been no way that the person making the doll would have known what my spirit name was or the significance behind it. And so what I'll share is that when I received my spirit name, Wasi Abanokwe, the elder at the time said that I appeared at the exact moment that night becomes day, and that my job, one of my purposes in life is to bring light where there's darkness. And so the fact that this doll has a lantern is really, really significant. So I just wanted to share that with you. I want to also let you know that in addition to being a daughter, a mother, a sister, and an auntie, I'm also a grandmother of two beautiful grandsons, Dominic and Dakota. I'm going to share a little bit about my history and how I come to this work. And so just bear with me. Growing up, we learned very early on the value of hard work. My family, we lived off the land. My father was a hunter, fisherman, trapper, a farmer, and that was during his spare time. His full-time job was as chief of police on our reserve of Wikumakong. My mother worked as a nurse at the Wikumakong nursing home, and it became a place where I, as a young girl, volunteered my time visiting the elders and writing letters for them to their loved ones. Little did I know at the time that these foundational teachings were preparing me for a career and life devoted to community and to public service. While growing up, my family did not have much, and there were many times where we went without. But one thing my parents instilled in us all was to, number one, always speak your truth, to be true to yourselves. Number two, never forget where you come from. Number three, to always work hard and commit to community service. And number four, to always believe in yourself and to never stop trying. So I'm going to ask you all to a favor and to activate your imaginations and just kind of listen along as I describe some scenarios. So imagine growing up with lots of chaos, lots of crisis, lots of trauma, but also a whole lot of love and a whole lot of joy and a whole lot of family. Imagine yourself as a young person seeing a future where you can be of service to your community and your people. Imagine trusting in creation and trusting that Creator will guide you to where you need to be. Imagine you are a single parent of a 5-month-old baby and deciding to pursue your education. Imagine as a single parent moving over 500 kilometers from home to study law and social work at the University of Toronto with a 3-year-old son, not knowing a single person in Toronto. Imagine quitting law school every single day, and the only thing keeping you there is the support of your mother, the voices of those who said you would fail, but more importantly, because your child is watching you. Imagine earning a law degree and a master's of social work degree in 3 years. Imagine being in school for the first 8 years of your child's life and feeling like you did not give him a good foundation. Imagine becoming a lawyer and trying to explain to your parents, your family members, what you do for a living. Imagine trying to explain to your family, your community, that you work with one of the divisions as part of the Ministry of the Attorney General, and not having a response when they ask you to confirm if you are a government lawyer. Imagine trying to explain or being unable to explain that you spent nearly a decade studying and learning about laws, policies, and systems that have hurt our people and that continue to hurt our people. Imagine having no words, no explanation as to why you're doing what you are doing, but at the same time, knowing at your core, knowing in your soul, what you are doing is what you need to do, but you are unable to articulate why. I think you all have seen the bio, and I'm very proud to say that I'm the first Anishinaabe female lawyer to be appointed children's lawyer for the province of Ontario. Prior to being a children's lawyer, I worked as counsel to 4 children's lawyers. And in 2015, I left the office of the children's lawyer to go work with Kim, actually, as when she became the first ADAG of IJD at the time. And for me to leave the OCL, it was very unsettling. It was terrifying because I took a risk. I left my comfort zone because up until that time, I had been working there since essentially my call. I also articled there 1996, 97. I left my comfort zone, but honestly, it was the best thing I ever did. It was a turning point in my career progression. All of the hard work, the dedication, the commitment, perseverance, resilience that it took to get me to this day today. I just celebrated a birthday the other day, so I'm in my 55th year of life. All of that work and commitment was absolutely worth it, because right now I can say without a doubt in my new role as the second ADAG for IJD, I can now answer those questions that I did not have answers to before. Now, if only I could for a moment in time visit my late parents to now explain why I studied so hard, why I felt the need to learn the laws, policies, and systems, why I do what I do know is that I am where I need to be right now. I'm surrounded by the people I need to be with today and tomorrow and in the future, and I'm just grateful to be here today. In the last 2 years, as the ADAG of IJD, what I've heard repeatedly is that Indigenous communities know what is needed, and they always have known what was needed, and that we must commit to decolonizing systems that continue to put Indigenous lives at risk. What I've also learned are the 4 agreements, which I'll speak to the 7 grandfather teachings, and they are, number 1, to always be impeccable with your words. And to me, this speaks to integrity and truth. Number 2, don't take anything personally. And this speaks to humility. And number 3, don't make assumptions. This speaks to courage, bravery, and wisdom. And number 4, to always do your best. And this speaks to respect and love. I just want to, before I conclude my remarks, I want to just share an elder's teaching that is so simple but yet profound. Our elders at the IJD Elders Council always tell us to think until we feel, and to feel until we think, and that without thought there are no feelings, and without feelings there are no thoughts. And as we look around the world today, it is a time of great change. And as an Anishinaabe, there's so much to be grateful for, and there's so much work to be done. And in my work, I'm always reminded of this elder's teaching about time. The elder said that when we are making important decisions or creating new ways of doing things, that we must always think about the impact that these decisions or new ways will have on future generations. We are often encouraged to think about the impact on 7 generations into the future. And we are encouraged to take the time, if we have the luxury of time, which often in working in the public service, we don't always have that luxury. The elders say that if we move too quickly down this path, that we're going to create dust, and those that are coming behind us will become lost. So it's important that we leave footprints. So I want to conclude by saying that I'm extremely proud that the Ontario Ministry of Attorney General is the only ministry of its kind in Canada with an Indigenous Justice Division, and we are leaving footprints. IJD's mission is to support the reclamation of Indigenous legal systems and strengthen justice for Indigenous people in Ontario. In our work, we are committed to improving the relationship between Indigenous people and the justice system, to reducing overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the criminal system, and to increase access to justice for all Indigenous people. So with the sharing I've done with you today thus far, I've taken you on a little journey. And so I want to say thank you, Miigwech, for walking with me and beside me and for being here today. Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you, Marian. That was really terrific. An inspiring story, and I think some of the things that really stuck out for me from some of that your comments. Think until feel until think, and think 7 generations into the future, which is are some really terrific messages, I think, for us to all hear and kind of reinforce. So we're also going to have so now we're going to have Fiona Crean provide some initial remarks, and as I mentioned, the plan is to have both Fiona and Kimberly provide some opening remarks, and then we'll get a chance to have a little bit of a dialogue with the panelists. So I'll turn it over to Fiona, who again was the inaugural Ombudsman from the City of Toronto.
Thank you, Marian. What a hard act to follow. I want to talk about what I have mostly pursued in my career by starting with saying that leadership has a context. It simply can't happen in a vacuum. And what has happened and continues to happen with many of our public institutions, policies, practices, procedures, and attitudes, is that they remain commonplace from a past time, but they're not working today for many people. They haven't, kept up with shifts in family structure and income, patterns and demographics. Far too many people are disadvantaged and face serious barriers to accessing services. That's compounded by socioeconomic factors, education, race, age, gender. We need only look at encampments across Canada in all of our cities and towns. And the consensus that to serve everyone fairly, we need to keep equity central to our treatment of employees and residents and citizens. but I believe it remains a great leap to explicitly consider the person's social location. To treat people differently is the only way to achieve equality of outcome. And governments are powerful. They set our policies, our processes. They provide services. We can't function without effective government. They are, in fact, the safeguard for public interest, and their job is to serve people. So all of that is my starting point. Many organizations, particularly governments, silence unwanted leaders with promotions. Rising to the challenge as a leader means being aware of the ways that we have incorporated systemic patriarchy, colonialism, and racism into our daily lives, into our work. In this context, leaders need to recognize the very real toll on many of our colleagues. I'm speaking about the toll of being undervalued, of feeling powerless, of being excluded. That means, as a leader, acknowledging the reality of many of your employees, of speaking openly, of sharing strategy, of exercising humility, and seeking advice and input from others around you. It also means being able to incorporate diverse views. At the same time, dismantling systemic barriers, both internally and externally, requires an awful lot of courage, a lot of nerve, and the ability to speak truth to power without fear. That last one is especially hard. But I think as public servants, it is our obligation to provide our best advice. I remember being asked by a former secretary to cabinet whether racism existed in a particular ministry. I replied that racism was very much alive. He thanked me for my honesty, but I can tell you my life back at the ministry got exponentially harder. I can tell you that if you want to be liked or need to be popular, real leadership roles are probably not for you. You have to have a thick skin. A good leader has to put themselves on the line every day and take risks and be there when it counts. I remember changing a bereavement policy leave to incorporate Indigenous cultural practices to extend the leave for 10 days. I thought it was a simple enough policy change. It caused a very ugly backlash. We pursued it. It was necessary, but it took a long time to change. Making leadership decisions requires a balancing act. And it's really important to keep central these three questions. What is my responsibility in the role that I have? What is right? What is the right thing to do? And are you operating out of the right ethical framework? So I have an example I can speak about because it's a matter of public record. When I was the municipal ombuds in Toronto, we took a systemic look at the public appointments process. You know, governments can't exist without the thousands of volunteers that help us on library boards, ice rinks, what have you. And one of the allegations was that the political leadership was putting its own names forward to sit on these boards. And I was told that there was a secret list. We didn't find the secret list. We did a very thorough investigation. There were some improvements that the city clerk could make, but that was the end of it. And then a list was produced to my office, and the internal discussion began about whether I should go back to city council. And I knew that it was very risky. I also knew that it was fundamentally my job to bring this to light. I did so, just as with my ministry experience, there were repercussions, but it was important to do. That's what I mean about speaking truth to power. And you can't be afraid of that, because if you're doing your job, and you're acting within your responsibility, and you're doing the correct thing, and you're operating out of an ethical framework, you're okay. You will be okay. It's not enough to be open to diversity. People need to see themselves reflected in public institutions at every single level of the organization. I once worked somewhere where the hiring was incredibly inclusive at the entry level, but faces bleached as promotions happened. So we needed to take a look at promotional opportunities, at what it was that was going on in the system. And indeed, we made changes, but they were really tough to pursue, because fundamentally what it tackled was notions of privilege and entitlement. None of this, of course, happens in isolation. It is your job as a leader to make difficult decisions, but you also need to share that authority. You need to seek consensus and create opinion leaders at every level of the organization. You need to be able to hear unpopular feedback. You need to hear the constructive criticism. It's not easy, but it's really important. A good leader needs to understand their own motivations, their responses to stress, and how they manage their reactions. They also need to understand their own unconscious bias, because we all have it. It's very difficult to examine, but we need to do that. Finally, I just want to say that a good leader is an enabler and an empowerer of others. Leadership is always situational. Good leaders know when to be upfront making those decisions, but they also know when to steward and lead from behind. So, Jared, those are just opening remarks. Thank you.
Well, that's fantastic. Really terrific comments, and lots to get into as part of our discussion. I think, a couple of key takeaways for me was just around understanding your own motivations, managing your reactions, and looking for your own unconscious bias. And of course, the importance of being an enabler and empowerer of others. So again, really appreciate those excellent opening perspectives. So I'm now going to turn it to Kimberly Murray, who is the Independent Special Interlocutor for Missing Children in Unmarked Burials. And I should say, with Kimberly and everybody else on the panel here, they've all had a distinguished career. So the current role that they're in builds upon a very extensive career of working as a leader across the public service. So Kimberly, I'll turn it over to you.
Sego segwego skinagoa Kimberly Murray yung yats ganyegahaga ni ine ganasatage wakwaho. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jared, for the introduction. As I just spoke in Mohawk, I told you my name and that I'm a proud member of Ganasatage Mohawk Nation, and I'm Wolf Clan. I want to first acknowledge her honor for her opening words, and say now Agoa for those comments, and say thank you to IPAC for inviting me to speak today, and also I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge these two amazing women that are on the co-panelists with me. I've been following both their careers for a long time, and I'm really honored to present together with you. And thank you both for sharing really meaningful comments of what you've learned in your life as leaders. And I think that many of us have had the same experiences with leadership. I thought that I would, before I get into talking about a couple of traits that I want to speak about, I just also want to remind everyone that next week is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and it's meant to be a day of reflection on our history and on our past. And as Marian had said, you know, it's really important to know where you come from. And as a country, we also need to know and understand where we've come from for us to be able to do better moving forward. I know, Jared, in your opening comments, you identified some of the topics that we might want to cover today, and reconciliation was one of those. And so next September 30th, next Saturday, please reflect on how each of you, in whatever role you're in whatever capacity, you can contribute to reconciliation with Indigenous people. And I acknowledge all the survivors and intergenerational survivors and the spirits of those little ones that haven't been found yet. So I thought, I think building on a couple of things that Marian said and Fiona said, I want to talk about this notion about the importance of coming to work with your true self. And I think that unfortunately, we're often taught that we have to separate our head from our heart, and that we have to lead only with our head. And I'm a very emotional person. I've always been an emotional person, and you know, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission speaks in great detail about the importance of people moving from their head to their heart for us to actually make any change, meaningful change in this country. You know, I often tell the story of how when I interviewed for the position of the Assistant Deputy Attorney General with the Ministry of the Attorney General, I had a very massive hiring panel. First of all, I think I'm probably the only ADM in the whole province of Ontario that had to be interviewed by, I think there were 7 people on my panel. But I had the great pleasure of having an elder who was brought in to sit on the panel to do the hiring. A very unique approach to choosing someone to start up a division. But I often like to tell people the story that when the elder asked me a question about how I can continue to do the work that I'm doing, I actually started crying. So I'm probably the only ADM that cried at her hiring interview in the process. And, you know, as a practicing lawyer, before I came and worked at the Ministry of the Attorney General, I worked at Aboriginal Legal Services, I would cry almost every day. Every day. You know, I can't tell you how many times I was in the washroom of Osgoode Hall Courthouse crying because of the terrible things that I was asked by the judges, the way I was treated by other counsel, but most importantly, crying because of the frustration that I felt doing the work and trying to make these big systemic changes in the legal system. And so, you know, it's really important to be okay with those tears, to be okay with that way of expressing yourself. Obviously not in every meeting you go to, but I think that that's okay because we're human beings. And I think that if you have that emotion and you feel what your work is and you feel what you're doing it for the right reason. I think that if you don't have some of those emotions, then you maybe need to think about, are you doing the work for the right reason? So I also wanted to talk a little bit, and Marian touched on this as well, this idea of humility, having humility when you come to work. And I think it's really important that leaders have humility. I think it's really important when you make a mistake that you acknowledge that you made a mistake, that you don't try and cover up that mistake, that you learn from that mistake, and you acknowledge it and you move forward to fix it in a good way. And I think having humility, as Marian says, one of our 7 sacred teachings, is also about asking yourself if you're doing things for the right reason. And I know Fiona mentioned this as well, because it shouldn't be about you. It shouldn't be about you in the public service. It should be about the public, about the people that you're serving. And I think that it's really important, and we all know this, that working in government, we struggle with these ideas that we're always being told to look for the quick wins and to get the low-hanging fruit. And I feel that quick wins and low-hanging fruit don't make meaningful change. And that quick wins and low-hanging fruit are for individuals, and not actually for the public or for making important policies and laws and procedures that have a real impact on individuals and communities. And we have to always remember that. When I worked at the province of Ontario, and I think I was on my 3rd deputy minister, I asked him, he had asked me if there's anything I can do for reconciliation, what would your advice be to me? And I had said to him, I want you to imagine that every briefing note, every document that comes to your attention that's asking for your approval, that you imagine there's a ticker tape across that says, how does this impact Indigenous people? And if you don't have the answer in that briefing note of how this policy, procedure, law is going to impact Indigenous people, you need to send it back down to the Indigenous Justice Division and other divisions within your ministry to make sure you know the answer to that question. And so I encourage everyone, as they're working in the public service, to think about the citizens of the province, to think about the citizens of the country, to think about Indigenous people, and how the work that you're doing impacts them for real. I also think it's really important. Jared had talked about one of the things to think about is self-care. And I think, you know, when you cry every day at work, it's really important that you surround yourself with people that are like-minded and that understand that, and that you can share your frustrations and your thoughts with those individuals. And I know that's really hard in leadership roles. It's really hard to do that. But you know what, it's okay to take care of yourself and to take the time that you need to recharge and refresh for the battle, if you will. The one thing I would say that I wish I knew then, what I know now, coming and working in the public service, is that it requires a lot of patience and perhaps more patience than I maybe have. And it's one of those things that I need to continue to work on, is to be patient with people. People are learning, especially when we talk about improving the lives of Indigenous people and we talk about reparations and reconciliation. Having the same conversations over and over and over and over again can be frustrating when you're trying to make systemic change. The turnover of deputy ministers, of ministers, you know, it's like Groundhog Day sometimes. And I know many people talk about, we had these conversations 20 years ago and we're still having them. But, you know, patience is really important. And so I think just when I'm looking at the time, maybe I'll stop there, because I'm really looking forward to the conversation and questions with everybody in attendance. So now Agoa.
Okay, that's terrific. Thank you very much, Kimberly. And again, a ton of great content to dig into, and lots of excellent insights that you provided. A couple that, you know, really stuck out for me is the importance of recognizing that we're human beings, and the importance of being okay with emotions, ensuring that you're doing the work for the right reason, and the focus on humility. So this is probably in some ways more the more enjoyable part of the discussion today is we want to get any comments or questions that folks who are attending have, so you can enter those into the Q&A part of the Zoom platform here, and then also for our panelists, we also want to give you folks an opportunity to comment or build upon any ideas that your fellow panelists have, and in addition to the opportunity to ask any questions of your panel colleagues. But maybe I'll just kind of start this part of the dialogue just to ask the panelists about the sort of context we're in as part of a post-COVID world. There's obviously a lot more hybrid working taking place these days, and traditionally, when we were in the office more often, it might have been a different context for leadership. So interested in any comments you have around how leadership styles need to or should adapt for the hybrid working environment. I imagine there are certain leadership principles that you've spoken about that would be important for any environment. But if you have any reflections on the more of a virtual world that we're living in, how do you lead and engage people in teams? Any comments or guidance you have around that would be of interest.
I'm happy to go first and respond a little bit. I think that it's really important that you have to trust people. And I know there's a lot of frustration and with the return to the workplace, and people got used to working from home and got used to remote work. And I think that as a leader, you have to start from the premise that you trust everyone that they're doing the work. And as the public service, as everyone knows, during COVID, everybody worked way more during COVID than they did before COVID. You get right up and you're on Zoom meetings from the very beginning of the day, and often sitting at your computer for 9 hours straight without having a break, or 10 hours. And so I think that, we're in this world now where it's really important for employees' wellness and their family wellness and well-being that we have to keep this shift of being able to work in different remote settings. And I know it's at first it was very difficult because we get used to, I said it in my comments, it's important to surround yourself with like-minded people to as you're doing difficult work. And you just have to make those extra efforts to connect with your team and your team members in a virtual world. A little more than when we were in the office together with our coffees in the morning and talking about our evenings the night before. So, but I think it's again, there has to be trust. Everyone needs to be trusted until they prove you wrong. I mean, it has to come from that basis. And I think, unfortunately, in some sectors of the public service, it doesn't come from that basis of trust.
That's terrific.
I think,
go ahead,
Jared,
Fiona.
if I could just add a comment to what Kimberly's just said. I didn't speak about it in my comments, but communication is the basis of this as well as trust. And I think in that sense, now Marian and Kimberly are closer to this than I am. But whether you're in a remote setting or in person, you cannot communicate enough as a leader. And by that I mean checking in with people, hearing from people, not to the point I've also had employees who've said, please leave me alone, I need to do this work. And that needs to be respected. But I think that it is very tough on leaders, on all employees, nowadays, where, as Kimberly said earlier, you're trying to grab the low-hanging fruit, you're trying to get quick wins for your boss, and you tend to forget the need to check in with people on a consistent basis. So I would just add that.
Jared, if I could just add a little bit to this. So just building on some of the comments that Kimberly and Fiona have shared. For me, what I've said all along throughout the the time of the pandemic and then the return to work is, for me, it matters not where the work is getting done as long as the work is getting done. And for me, if I could, just allow folks to do the work where they're most comfortable, having regard to all of the circumstances that individuals are, in, whether it's, family situations, maybe they're caring for other family members, children, or, aging parents, that kind of thing, or, also having their own mental health issues potentially, and or dealing with, mental health issues that their children may have developed during the pandemic. So if it were up to me, I would just, allow for staff to work where they feel best, where they feel they can perform the best. What was a struggle and what is a struggle for me currently still is, we are in a, we work in a ministry and it is a hierarchical structure. I don't operate in a hierarchy. I see myself being equal with everyone in the division. And if it means, rolling up my sleeves and doing the work alongside them, that's what I will do. One of the things that I really struggle with is, there's a message of, okay, you're now coming back 3 days a week. There's a requirement for you to impose on the staff that they need to come back 3 days a week. The other day we had a staff meeting and not everybody was in the office. Now our staff has grown in the last year. And to bring everybody back in the office, the staff room was just jammed. It was full. Even if we were to bring everyone back, there wouldn't be enough space for everybody, at least in our current situation. And so I really struggle with that balance. It's a fine balance where you have your own personal views and your own sort of way of approaching how you would do things, but yet you're working within a system that's telling you must come back 3 days a week, and having to explain to staff, the rationale for that, and not really being able to, because you don't yourself really understand the rationale for it. I keep going back to, like, my thinking is it matters not where the work's getting done as long as it's getting done. And I know for certain that people have worked longer and harder while working from home. I could speak personally myself, like, if I don't have the commute, I'm on a computer. The public service actually gets probably 3 extra hours a day out of me, if not more, right? And when I'm working remotely, and because I don't have the commute and I'm able to log in earlier, and unfortunately or fortunately, I'm staying on later. So, and I can say the same for the staff at the Indigenous Justice Division and also previously at the Children's Lawyer's Office. So, it's a real fine balance, I think, and I continue to struggle with it. So I just wanted to share that piece.
That's terrific. Really, really great insights and lots of excellent practical feedback and perspectives there.
Jared, do you mind if I make a comment?
Yeah, please do.
I'm not sure I'm supposed to. I'm not one of the members of the panel, but
no, you're very welcome to. Yes.
I want to make a comment about the obligation of leaders in these times when we're talking about the future of work, and particularly hybrid work. I totally agree with the comments about trust and communication. One of the things that I worry about is the ability to continue operating as teams. And for some organizations, that's particularly important. It isn't satisfactory to just have people go and do their work in splendid isolation, and they may deliver a particular product. but you can't teach culture via Zoom, I don't think. And the thing that I worry about most, and the obligation is on leaders, is that the people who are missing out, who aren't getting the mentoring they need, are the young people, the newest people. And I don't mean formal mentorship programs. I'm meaning the informal mentorship that comes from a conversation when you ask someone a quick question, a conversation that then is instigated that involves a whole group of team. You would not necessarily plan a meeting to have that conversation. And I worry that we're going to have a generation of people who have never had that kind of mentoring, that kind of informal access to people with some wisdom, who have learned through the system. And I think in a situation where that's going to continue, I think the obligation is really on leaders to think carefully about how that kind of mentorship can be encouraged, not only for the good of the organization, but particularly for the good of individuals as they begin their careers.
Yeah, that's really wise words, and I think a challenge to us all, how we engage that, particularly that new generation. Marian, I see you want to.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. So aside from our day-to-day work in our professions, I think we can build on that as well. And I think that in our personal lives, like for me, I take community service very seriously. I'm very passionate about it. I'm always looking for opportunities to give back. One of the things that we wanted to talk about today is self-care. And self-care looks different to everybody. Everybody has their own sort of idea of self-care. What works for you may not work for someone else. And for me, my idea of self-care was coaching hockey. And during the pandemic, we had our season shut down, and then we had, limited opportunity go on the ice. But having that contact, the team also to have that contact with one another and to also receive that mentorship. So it goes even beyond the workspace, but it also goes to some of the work that you do in community. Because I saw during the pandemic, I actually had a couple of the players that really struggled from a mental health perspective. In fact, one developed a severe eating disorder, and she ended up in the hospital. She didn't end up returning that year, but she was in the hospital because her blood pressure or her heart rate was like less than a certain amount, and she was at risk of a heart attack because she wasn't eating. That's just one example, but it really impacted the hockey team and the rest of the team, right? But it also served as an opportunity for education and awareness. So just kind of, the old adage, out of something, like not really a tragedy, but something negative, you turn it into a positive. And there's some teaching in that as well. So took it as a teaching moment to kind of teach the girls about some of the issues, and then also just have them talk. But I really resonate with what Your Honor has said, because I think that is really something that is absolutely critical, but not only in our day-to-day job, but also in our community service and what we do in terms of our volunteer work. So I just wanted to share that piece. You got.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's a good reminder just about the importance of our community and volunteer work, and a lot of the leadership insights that we're talking about today applies in that domain as well. So I know we've only got about 5 minutes left. I knew this was going to happen when we designed the session with such an important topic and such a great group of panelists and speakers. We do have a question that came in, and it in many ways builds on Her Honor's comment about engaging the new generation of public servants. That question is about how do we attract a new and continue to engage and keep optimism among new public servants. Not necessary to answer that question, but I did want to give each of the panelists feel free to comment on that question or any other final comments you have. We'll just maybe just go around the group and, you know, just in a minute or so, if you wanted to comment, maybe, and we'll start with you, Fiona.
Well, I just, picking up on your Honour's comments, I think it is incumbent on leaders to figure out how to connect, communicate with, and be there for new, young public servants. And it's thinking right outside the box. And it is also the case that we need to incorporate a notion of that next generation not necessarily being interested in sitting in the staff room or working at the board table. In my experience, I used to work somewhere where lots of the young folks were in the local Starbucks, hanging off a chair in a cafe. I don't know what it means, but I think, again, leadership is situational, and you have to think about what your set of responsibilities are as the ADM, as the whatever leadership position you're in, around answering your Honour's concerns. Because if we don't, we're in trouble for the future, right? And there is a break of trust between citizens and government, and it's part of our responsibility to be a part of the solution to repairing that. And that is an investment in young folks.
Great. Kimberly, any in a minute or so, any sort of final remarks from yourself?
Yeah, I think I think I have two young daughters, young adults, and I think about how they like to work and engage and interact with individuals. And I think, just as what Fiona was mentioning, this idea of how do we attract new workers into the public service, I think is really important for leaders to think about how we can't keep doing the work the same way we've always done it. And Fiona mentioned, thinking right outside the box. And I'm a strong believer that it's not enough to think outside of the box, that sometimes we have to get rid of the box and we have to completely change our paradigm and how we approach things. And because I think the young people and private sector are way ahead of the public sector in attracting young talent into their fold. And I think, just as my last sort of comment, I think it's really important that as leaders you follow your instincts. Your instincts always know. I'm a very strong believer in that. And I always ask myself in the work that I'm doing and have been doing is, am I doing enough to make my ancestors proud? And so I always encourage young Indigenous lawyers to ask themselves those questions as well. And if you can say yes, then I think that you're on the right track.
Great. And Marian, and then we'll give the last word to Your Honor.
Sure.
Marian, did you want to?
So just to build on Kim's comments, what I would do is replace that box with the medicine wheel. I bet you Kim knew I was going to say that. So I learned about the teachings of the medicine wheel, I don't know, like 30 years ago. And every day I still learn different parts of it and still continue to learn and add to my, toolbox, I guess, so to speak. But the one thing I'll say is that there needs to be some consistency in your approach and your I think just your communications with people, generally speaking. And what I mean by that is I am a firm believer in lifting people up always. It doesn't matter who they are, how they come to you, the fact that they're on your path, there's a reason for it. Like, somebody comes on your path for a reason. So if there's an opportunity to lift someone up, then you should do that. And that's something I do on a daily basis, or at least I try to. And even if that means that, the person that is coming to you, you may want to keep them with you because they're such a great, person and a great staff. It doesn't mean that you have to hang on to them. You can't hold people back. You need to it can't be about you, as Kim said. it needs to be about the greater good, and it needs to be about lifting that person up so that they can get to the next level, whatever it is that they're trying to do. So I'm all about lifting people up to that next level. And I think that's something that's absolutely critical, and we need to do and be sort of mindful, always have that front of mind all the time.
That's great. Great. Which, Your Honor, did you have any final concluding comments for us today?
Just to say what a great conversation it's been. It could have gone on, of course, much, much longer. There's so much wisdom to be shared. One last thing to think about, and just as we thought about young people entering, we also need to think about leaders. One of the things that I will remember most from the last 3 years during the pandemic is the opportunity I had to reach out to over 200 leaders all over the province, leaders in all kinds of sectors, in all kinds of businesses. And my only question to them was, how are you doing? And they were shocked that somebody would ask them as leaders, because we tend to think that leaders are invincible. And yet so many leaders do not have anyone they can talk to. And so I would also encourage people to actually speak upward as well to other leaders and to those whom you admire, and just remember that that they're living the same experiences that all of us are, and they need to be asked how they're doing from time to time. Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this afternoon. I much appreciate it, Jared. Okay,
that's terrific. Excellent discussion. Very much appreciate all of the great perspectives that all of our excellent panelists shared with us. So a big thank you to our panelists and speakers. And I'm seeing a heart there. And a big thank you to the IPAC community for organizing this event, and for folks being able to participate and pose some excellent questions. So with that, I'll just wish everybody a great rest of the day, and also a great weekend ahead. Miigwech.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.